Hey everyone, welcome back to the Asians Represent podcast, the Emmy Award-winning series that explores Asian representation in games, media, and beyond. My name is Daniel, and I'm one of the co-hosts. For this episode, I'm joined by two of the most prolific Asian designers that I know in the tabletop gaming space.
I
Banana
actually
Chen
thought
and
you were gonna
oh,
say I thought you were gonna say I'm joined by two of the most Asian designers
the most Asian designers.
ever.
We are going to be talking about one of the most Asian games that you can get. I was going to say welcome to the show, but it's actually welcome back because you two were both on the show in 2019. We recorded an episode
Whoa.
at
In
Fan
the
Expo
hallway of
Canada
Fan Expo.
in the hallway sitting on the floor. There's a photo
Right.
somewhere.
That's 5 years
Um,
ago.
I know.
That is wild.
So let's do some intros before we even talk about like our history together.
Yeah.
Who are you for the audience who haven't been listening since episode 19 of Asians Represent?
Hi, I'm Banana Chan. My pronouns are she, they, and he. I'm a game designer, writer. I write for various types of games. I am also a publisher. So I'm the owner of a small box RPG publishing company called Read Write Memory, previously known as Game and a Curry, but now it's Read Write Memory. So yeah,
Because we're all at a curry.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
all out. We're rebranding.
And Sen, who are you? Who are you?
Hi, my name is Sen-Foong Lim. I'm a psych professor by day and a game designer writer by night, and I write a lot of stuff in various RPGs like Kids on Bikes and for 5e and all sorts of stuff. But Banana and I have been writing stuff for a while now together and apart, and we've made a couple of games. But our first and probably our best thing that we've done together, well, I don't know about that. But anyways, our first thing that we really put together,
Wow, selling ourselves short already.
yeah, I know. Well, because I love all of our things. But Jiangshi is a really, really important part of our collective
Mhm.
partnership together and our lives and our history. So that's what that's about. But I'm also known for a lot of stuff in the board and card game arena, all the way from original titles like Belfort and Junkart to work on major IPs with comic books, movies, and video games. So I did like the Kingdom Rush board games. I did stuff for Batman and X-Men
Mind
and all sorts of
management?
stuff, mind management if you're into
Yeah.
indie comics. And we're going to have a couple of cool announcements in the near future about the next comic that we're working on after Core of Discovery, which is based on the comic called Manifest Destiny. So we have another one that we'll be announcing shortly. And I think Jay, my partner, who I design with, but he is the owner operator of Off the Page Games, just signed another contract that I can't talk about yet, but it's going to be super cool. Super cool. And then Daniel, in our before recording chat, which took up a whole lot of time, which is hilarious.
Yeah, too much time.
Right? But Daniel just told me about another comic that I'm like, oh, now I'm super interested in that one, and maybe we can get that one, Daniel.
We should talk about that one. We
Yeah.
we have systems in place already. I think it'd be an easy one to do.
There you go. Okay, cool. Anyways, that's what I do. That's me. in a
Yeah.
nutshell.
So we're here to talk about Jiangshi because let's go back to 2021. So after raising over $100,000 on Kickstarter, you two published Jiangshi Blood in the Banquet Hall with Wedding Games. And now you're back with a new crowdfunding campaign for a reprint of the game, plus a whole new series of adventures.
Yes. So this is basically an updated version of the game. We're trying to clean up all the typos, trying to clean up all of the, anything that's like mechanically we missed out on, or anything that we're just like, things that we're trying to clarify in like the actual text of the book. So that's the first part of it. We're also trying to find more accessible ways to manufacture the book, so that way we can keep it at a lower cost for anyone who's trying to get a copy of it. And on top of all of that, we're also doing a cool scenario book, which I think a few people that are very awesome that might be in the room with us right now have contributed to. So yeah.
What? Yes, that's true. Yeah, we could. I don't know. Can we? I don't want to spoil what.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
You can talk
Whatever.
Okay.
about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we talk about these new haunts, these adventures, I think it's important to provide an overview of Jiangshi, because there may be people who are just joining us now who didn't have a chance to back the first campaign, who have heard about it but may have never had a chance to play. So, like, what is Jiangshi?
Oh, so it's a role playing game. Done. No, it's 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 a
There,
role
that's it.
playing
That's
game
all you
that
need.
really is, and I describe it to anybody who asks me. It's a love letter to our past, to ourselves even, right? So when Banana and I started writing it, we had really looked at how we as Canadian Chinese, American Chinese people have been kind of gradually accepted in this country, but originally we're not. Um, and this was at a time it didn't happen this way, but it happened this way. Like it wasn't intentional. But then there's all that COVID stuff and all that Asian hate stuff that was going on at that time. And it's like, okay, this is why we have to do this project. This is part of why we're doing the project. It didn't start out that way, but it ended up that way in a lot of ways. That the history of Chinese people in North America is fraught with lots of actually legal things that were put in place to stop us from being part of the greater community, right? And one of the things that is very true about most diasporas is that the initial foothold that people get is through culture, and a lot of that's through food. And so we thought, well, what if we have this setting that's just in a restaurant? And what if we have all these like generational things? Because that's what Banana and I experienced ourselves as like second generation kids or first and a half generation kids, whatever we are. And that's all very weird, anyways, how you define that. But basically, children of immigrants, right, who are growing up in a culture that we're not part of, that we're kind of not welcomed in. I grew up in the 70s. It still was weird, right? To be Asian in the 70s was a weird thing in Canada. Now it's very normal. My kids, who are half Chinese and half not Chinese, are growing up in a wonderful time when things like K-pop has everybody thinking that, oh, Asians are cool, right? But it did not start out that way, everybody, and it was even worse for our predecessors, not necessarily our ancestors, because my relatives aren't from the places where they came to do work on the gold during the gold rush, right? But those people paved the way for all three of us to be allowed, which is a weird word, to be in existence in Canada and the United States, right? And so this was kind of an homage to them. And then we thought about, well, who could the bad guy be? And the bad guy turned out to be the hopping vampire. And I don't know, Banana, how you kind of came up with the hopping vampire as the thing, but it really did work as
I
this analogy for oppression and just sucking the soul like right out of people
Yeah.
with like microaggression and things like that being very difficult to deal with on a daily basis. And you think about
Uh-huh.
the grind that restaurant workers go through. um and yeah, that's the basic story. And there was an earlier part to it where we had tried to think about how to do randomization, and we had originally thought about using Jiaobei, which are the like a half moon wooden blocks that you throw
Mhm.
in Taoist divination, and that's actually the mechanical basis of the game, or was originally. But we changed it to D8s after we found out those are really expensive to like manufacture.
And 8 is a good number too.
It is
8
a
is a
good
very good
number.
number.
Yeah, I don't remember how the Jiangshi became a thing, to be honest. I think a part of it was I was looking at like esoteric Taoism a lot and just reading through a lot of like mythology and yeah, somehow I don't know why we decided on Jiangshi to be honest now looking back, but my memory is also very bad. So
Can I share my interpretation of why I think Jiangshi is a
yeah,
good, like, thing to have in this game, or the
yeah,
Mhm.
core
please, yes.
antagonist? So, like, so you've mentioned, so for context, so I wrote on the first Jiangshi and then wrote on the reprint. So I wrote all the, like, the Canadian historical stuff that's in the first one. And so when Sen, you were talking about, like, literal legal barriers for Chinese immigration. We're talking about like the Chinese Exclusion Act in the United
Hmm.
States and the Chinese Immigration Act in Canada.
And the
Um,
anti-miscegenation laws. Those
yeah,
those are my favorite.
there's like a whole history of ways in which the American and Canadian governments prevented Chinese people from coming into the countries to work. But the way I kind of see it, Jiangshi as a game is about like takes places around like food. It's not always just a
Mhm.
restaurant. It could be like a food truck, anything, right?
Hmm.
But it touches on a lot of really relatable themes, like sort of like intergenerational knowledge, racism, the immigrant experience. But in the game, you are very specific about saying that these can be horror stories, but these could also be comedies.
Mhm.
And if you
Yeah.
look at Jiangshi media is very, very diverse in that you have some movies that lead hard into horror, and then some movies that are actually horror comedies. And
Mhm.
so I think the
Yes.
creature of the Jiangshi is one from Chinese pop culture and folklore that really fits well into multiple different tones of story.
Because I
That's
mean,
my sort of
well,
interpretation.
That's
they are
yeah.
entirely horrific, but they're also hilarious.
They could only walk.
Yes.
They could only jump in straight lines. You can
They're
like
they're like
ward them
they're
off
like
with a bowl of rice.
they're like one stage up from a Dalek, right?
Yeah,
Like, you know how you get away from a
100%.
Dalek? You
Yeah.
run up the stairs. That's
Go
what
up the
you do.
stairs.
But, like, the
The
concept of, like, a hopping corpse, just because it's, like, it's hopping, it's basically, it's suffering from rigor mortis, it, like,
They
can't
hop with their
move.
arms straight out like
Right.
this.
Yeah, and so it's like yeah, the idea is, like, very terrifying, but at the same time, like, if you see one in real life, like, it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's why I think it lends itself well to stories of different tones, right? You
Mhm.
could have like the goofy hopping vampire, and the story could entirely be around like this young family and the kids who are like, this thing's like jokes on this thing. Well, we'll just run in a diagonal patterns or
Yeah, we'll
whatever.
just hold our breath.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's the
and
same with, like, Mr. Vampire, like, we see that Mr.
exactly.
Vampire
yeah.
spooky encounters, like yeah, there were a lot of kung fu movies in I wanna say, like, the '70s and '80s that
Mhm.
they were all pretty funny. They were all just,
They're
like,
goofy.
silly, goofy
They're
movies, yeah.
goofy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you get to the modern ones, like, you already said the word, the magic word of rigor mortis,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
that's a straight up horror movie.
that's a straight up
Yeah.
horror movie, like, it is dark. And I think that so speaking of the differences and the similarities between Banana and I, um, we both kind of met each other online because of I don't know, I think we're just both sad people, right?
What?
Okay.
What?
It's partly that.
I mean, it is true, yes,
It's
but
true, we're both sad, and so we bonded over some really weird, like, just, like, sad react only type things, right?
Oh God.
And then,
Okay.
I like dark, dark, dark horror, and Banana was more on the, like, spoopy tip at the time, and this is kind of, like, where we kind of coalesced, is this thing that could be spoopy, but also could be, like, dark if you wanted it to be, so I think that, like you said, Daniel, that's a good analysis that the junction fits into that and can be used in this way. And I mean, the modern American or I guess European vampire has existed so long that it is also used in many, many ways now. That it's not just scary, that's also funny. And there's like Renfield was hilarious,
What we do in the shadows.
right? What we do in the
Mhm.
shadows, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that Hong Kong cinema back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was just maybe before their time. Maybe they were just a
Yeah.
little bit before their time. I mean, the history of stuff in China is just ancient and old, right? It's a lot of old folklore, and so I think the whole make fun of the things you're scared of may have just come up earlier for us for that reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's also a pretty iconic creature in Chinese folklore.
Mhm.
You think
Mhm.
of monsters in China, like the Jiangshi is probably one of the most well-known ones, in addition to
Mhm.
like all the ghosts and stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's also tied to a lot of superstitions. There are a lot of, I mean, if we asked all of the older generation, we'd probably get like 100 different ways in which you deal with a Jiangshi. And I think that lends itself well to a very diverse game experience.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we kind of touched on the setting and the core sort of component of the game, which is like family and food, and ideally like a restaurant. But what is like that core gameplay loop that folks can expect from Jiangshi? Like, how is a session structured?
Yeah, so I think the session is structured. I mean, you could do it either as a one shot or like a multi session campaign. It's usually like a shorter campaign, right? So each session could be like one in game day. That's one way you could do it. And it uses like a board. So the restaurant is represented by this board that has a circle in the center, and it's separated by 4 quadrants. So the first one is early morning, where you're doing your chores, and that's conducive to like some good role play. It sort of like warms you up into like doing your warm play, and role play warms you up into doing your role playing.
I like
And
warm
then
play. That's a new
Warm
term.
play.
yeah, warm play.
Let's use it. It's like
And
the opposite of
then
cold play. That
oh my
band.
god, yeah. Start a band. It's just called warm play.
It's a Coldplay
Oh,
cover
God.
band.
Lukewarm play.
Right.
And then the second quadrant is the afternoon, when the restaurant opens up and customers start coming in. The third quadrant is the evening, so the Jiangshi are out and they're like hopping around, and you sort of have to like protect your customers or protect
Yeah, because it's also
yourselves.
dinner service, right?
Right, so it's dinner service as well, and that's happening. And then at the dead of night, that's when the restaurant closes, and you still have to deal with the Jiangshi, but that's the only thing you have to deal with now, really.
I mean, really, it's not so bad.
Yeah, exactly. Is it really that bad? It is pretty bad. But
Pretty bad.
and yeah, before you turn in for the night. And so that's sort of like what a day looks like. And in terms of like the restaurant itself, it gives you special abilities, so you can like re-roll your dice, or it could like help you with your die rolls in general. And as you're taking neglect, like say you're not accomplishing your chores on time or something like that, then you cover up those special abilities so that you're unable to complete them, or the restaurant goes to neglect that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that the one of the cool things about it is that it actually like you can actually lose at the game. So in terms of losing, if you collect 8 spots of neglect, then your restaurant goes into decay, it closes down, and that's one way that the game can end, aside from completing the campaign or session or whatever. So yeah, that's pretty much how the restaurant works.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
much like a day in the life of a Chinese American family that owns
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we talked to lots of people. I've worked in my uncle's restaurant, all these things. A lot of people who were writing for us or talking with us and consulting with us have personal firsthand experience of working in the restaurants, owning the restaurants, that kind of thing as a family. And yeah, it was this thing where the restaurant took on its life as a basically like a co-constructed, co-controlled character that the whole family was taking care of, right? Realizing that as your restaurant goes into decay, that your ability to survive in this world that doesn't really want you there decreases and decreases and decreases. There's another neat mechanic that was the overnight mechanic, which has to do with dreams, because bad dreams are bad, right? And so you would have these cards dealt out to you, the Hmong cards, which are dreams, and you would not be able to talk about them specifically. You'd have to like describe what you saw in your dreams, because they're just art pictures done by several amazing artists, and they basically portray like weird and kind of dark, nebulous things that might make you feel weird and bad, and invoke those feelings inside you, and you have to like get them out by talking to your family members and talking about these things, like as the Jiangshi are like basically haunting and accumulating in your area. They're basically, if you don't know, they don't suck blood, right? They suck like your psychic ability, your
Your
psychic energy, your,
chi.
your chi, right?
Mhm.
And that gives you imbalance. And when you're unbalanced, you will have bad dreams. And when you have bad dreams, the only way to get rid of them is maybe to talk to your family, which is the funniest thing, because as the three
Hey,
of
we
us
don't do
know,
that.
we don't
Yeah.
do that
We
as
don't do
Asians.
that.
This is the funniest thing, everybody who doesn't really know me, because I'm a therapist by training, and my parents would always talk about their friends' kids. I'm sure I've told you guys this in passing because it's this funny story. They talk about their friends' kids or my classmates from when I grew up, and they say, "Oh, this person's becoming a doctor and they're becoming a chiropractor. They're an engineer." And then I said, "Oh, what do you tell them about me?" And they said, "We don't talk about what you do." So again, if you don't
I feel
understand
that.
Chinese, yeah, if you don't understand
Yeah.
Chinese culture out there, we don't talk about mental health
Yeah, I feel like there's
almost at
two
all.
sides, right?
There
Like there's
are.
like a spectrum of, I mean, actually it's not a spectrum. It's like two extremes, right? Like you have
Yeah.
the family members who tell you everything that's happened in their past and like use you as a therapist, or you have like the family member who's like the parent, who's just like, I'm not going to tell you anything. Like nothing's
Mhm.
ever happened. Like I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
I
dreams come out and you have to like kind of like deal with them. Otherwise, they sort of take up space in your brain space, and you can't do as much, right? So
Mhm.
the idea basically is that the vampires are sucking away your ability to keep your restaurant afloat, which then results in your family having to either leave the area, shut down the restaurant, all these things that are negative consequences of not being able to deal with the juncture.
Yeah, it's very much affecting the balance of like family and work. And in the case of restaurants, the two are very much intertwined.
Hmm.
Like my grandfather owned some of the like the early Chinese restaurants here in Toronto. And when I was like writing the history stuff, I was like doing a lot of interviewing and stuff like that. And it's my mom worked in a lot of these restaurants, and the stories that you'd hear are like very, very interesting. They're, you hear stories about like the success of restaurants, the failure of restaurants. And I think it's interesting how the Jiangshi not only serves as like a plot device that is horrific, but also a way in which to create and facilitate like melodrama
Hmm.
Mhm.
between all of the players. But we've talked about a lot about like the Chinese diaspora. We've talked about like Jiangxia as like a very, very culturally specific horrific entity. We've talked about like racism. uh, We've alluded to many like Chinese superstitions and the immigrant experience and stuff like that. Um, in addition to like simply the title of the game, Jiangxia Blood in the Banquet Hall, like this is very much heavily focused on like the Chinese diasporic experience, at least at face value.
Hmm.
Like, so will those who are unfamiliar with this still be able to appreciate like the nuances of the game? Like, oh, I'm not Chinese. Am I going to be able to play this game? Or like, are there structures in place that will actually help people navigate these topics with care?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the book itself, it has a whole section on basically like how to play a character that isn't like you, right? So, how to play like a Chinese character. We have a whole section on that. We worked with James Mendez Hodes, who's not Chinese, but he sort of like helped us think about things in a way where it's like, well, have you thought about, adding rules or guidelines on if you have a racist NPC, like how would you approach that? And so we worked together with him on trying to create guidelines to make the gaming experience a safe one where everyone feels like they're having a good time, and also that he helped us out with like areas where we could sort of try to convey the information a little bit better to an audience who might not be Chinese. So that way they'll be like, oh, okay, like I understand, you know, how to play the scene out, or, I know what types of stuff to like integrate into the scene. And on top of that, we had a lot of writers come on board who basically like went through uh, you know, what it's like to work in a restaurant, and added their own and sort of like, I was about to say ingredients. That's not what I wanted to say. Their
It would
own
have been good though.
Yeah.
their own flavor. Yeah,
Oh,
There
you're
you
still
go.
on
yeah,
There you
brand.
yeah,
go.
yeah, we're still
Always be
on
on
it.
brand. Always be on brand,
Yeah,
banana.
right. They add their own their own writing on what types of food would be served in like a Chinese restaurant during what times of day. um, and we talked to actually someone that I used to go to elementary school with. Her name's Samantha Lai, Sammy Lai, and she came from a restaurant family, and so she basically wrote the entire section on what types of food would be served. So she went through like dim sum and what what is dim sum and like when is that served, versus like, you know, I don't know, like she added like a whole section on like rice, and yeah, she did a whole lot of work on that.
Yeah.
There is, for those who are curious about like the types of restaurant, like food served at Chinese restaurants, there is like a very interesting history of why like Chinese American restaurants serve like fried chicken, for
Oh,
instance.
yeah.
Mhm.
My mom, because of living in like and working in these restaurants, really loves egg rolls, even though they're not really Chinese.
That's right.
Because of like the way in which these restaurants have had to adapt to the palate of like their areas.
Yeah, and that is one of the most important things that I personally learned doing the research for this book, for the game, is that I had so historically my family is from Malaysia and Brunei, which is not part of China at all. It was where my parents and my grandparents escaped to after World War II, kind of during World War II, and so my connection to Chinese culture is a little more distant than other people who are still Chinese ethnically, because culturally I have more like Southeast Asian stuff that I do. And what I found out during the research is just how important it was for Chinese restaurants to exist so that Chinese people could exist. And if you didn't have a restaurant that catered to the palates of the local constituency of the area that you were trying to survive in, didn't matter if the food was authentic, you would not survive. And so everybody was serving the stuff that was made with local stuff, tempered to the local palate, at the cost that the locals would pay for it, all that kind of stuff. And that's why there are those little like kind of secret menus, or they if you walk in, like if I walk into a Chinese restaurant like in some really remote place of Canada, they'll like beam and smile, and they'll be able to they'll say, "Oh, we can cook something authentic now." Right? Because there is that kind of weirdly secret menu. And it's not a menu. It's just that, oh, this person will probably not want, pork fried rice with sweet and sour sauce.
Mhm.
Because that's again not really a thing, except it is a thing.
They're
And
just
so
trying to
again,
cater to your needs.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
You should see, there is this I forget what the show was called. It was on Vice. It was
mhm.
a food show that Eddie
Yes, I know,
Wong
I know.
hosted.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great one. And
He went to Jamaica with Sean Paul, who's Chinese.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Sean Paul was talking about, oh, this is like my favorite Chinese food in Jamaica. And Eddie was like having this experience of like, oh, this is like very different Chinese
Yeah, it
food.
is. It is. Right? It's just like how when you see like Hakka Chinese food, which is
Mhm.
very Indian influenced, that it's not at all the same, and it's very interesting stuff. But anyways, I read this book by a woman who was a writer from Vancouver who traveled across the country to, I think, like 30 different Chinese restaurants across all the provinces, and she just kind of wrote about the history of it, and it was fascinating to me, and it really did change my mind about the importance of Canadian Chinese food, American Chinese food, because I really did have a disdain for it, because it's like that's not Chinese food to me, and
Yeah.
it's not, and I get that, but I also now understand why it's so important, and the whole restaurant system that comes from it. There are people who aren't restaurateurs at all, but if they want to come to Canada or the United States, like in the 70s and 80s, they would save up all their money and they would buy a restaurant out, and then that restaurateur who owned it originally would teach them how to make all the food, and then they would just keep making the same food, which is why in a lot of these restaurants the menu doesn't change, the colors don't change, because they're not really restaurateurs. They bought a life in Canada or a life in America. That's what they bought.
Yeah.
And
My
there's
my
all these
grandfather
histories of that.
my grandfather would always say that, owning a restaurant was always a good move because even if business was slow, you always had food for your family.
Yeah.
Same with
Oh.
like the Chinese immigrants who came to like North America and started working at laundromats,
Mhm.
because
You got to do it
even if
anyways.
you had to do it anyways, but also even if you don't have a home, you always have something soft to sleep on with
Oh,
sturdy laundry.
yeah.
Oh.
That's what my grandfather said a lot.
Right. And
Um,
it's so interesting because those two tasks, when you think about them, they're effeminized, right? They're tasks that are pushed towards women. And one of the reasons that legally those were some of the only jobs that Chinese men could do
Mhm.
in Canada and the States was to effectively effeminize them so they wouldn't interbreed with Canadian and American women. And there are actual laws in place, like when I said anti-miscegenation laws, up until I think like 1935-ish, maybe even after the war. I'm not sure.
For well,
For the
the Chinese Immigration Act lasted until I think 47.
Yeah, so just
Yeah,
after the war.
when the
But the
civil rights.
anti-miscegenation laws, I think, might have ended in 35. And we'll do some research on that. But they were the ones that would say, like, if you own a company as a Chinese man, you cannot hire white unmarried women.
There's an entire story arc about that in the TV show Warrior,
That's right.
Yeah.
where Atoy has to partner with like a white guy to establish like a farm.
I'm so
Also
happy
a
they got another
very
season.
Yes, also a
Yeah.
very influential series. That's what we were watching at the time.
Yeah.
Like literally Warrior every day. Banana and I would like talk about Warrior, talk about the last
Mhm.
episode of Warrior, because it was a really big influence on the game. It doesn't show because we don't have fighting in the game. That's another funny thing about this game. Everybody asks me, so what are the combat rules like? It's got to be like martial arts and stuff. I said, nope.
Why do you assume that there's martial
Yeah,
arts?
exactly.
Let's talk about that. But I know we're running out of time. I wanted to circle back to an initial question that I asked as
Mhm.
we wrap up, and it's what can folks expect from this reprint? You mentioned, you know, grammatical errors, spelling errors, maybe formatting changes. I had to go through that with Ross rifles. There was like some headings were weird. We reprinted and fixed all of it.
Yeah,
That
just
is
making it
awesome.
Yes.
more intuitive and cleaner.
Yeah.
What's new? Like what tell me about the new haunts.
Yeah,
Oh.
so we currently have I should probably check to see how the writing is coming along. We have many new haunts. I want to say up to 15 new haunts.
Nice.
And if we don't have 15, then I'll write the extra ones myself.
It'll
But
make 15.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But basically, all the different haunts, it's mostly mostly Chinese scenarios, but there are also some that are like other types of immigrant families that are surrounded, the basically like either in Canada or in the US. And so they're in either of those two locations. And I can give you a quick rundown of who is writing on it.
Yes,
If that's
please.
Mhm.
okay. Well, Daniel Kwan is one of our
Oh, what?
fantastic writers.
Gasp.
I'm going to turn the interview back onto you if you want to talk about your scenario.
I can, so we don't spoil anybody else's stuff. Um,
Yeah, sure, go for it.
yes, we'll wrap. So after this, I wrote a haunt that's basically an adventure called Hatchets and the Bloody Angle.
Yeah.
The Bloody Angle is in New York, in Manhattan, Doyer Street, and it's one of the most violent streets in America's history. It's in Chinatown. It's where a lot of like Chinese on Chinese violence took place between like gangs during like the Tong Wars. And so the adventure is set, you know, in 2024. COVID has just happened. There's a ton of tension. And it's actually based on a Delta Green adventure that I intended on publishing, but didn't.
Very nice.
I actually did research into all of the different buildings and what existed in like the 19th century. And the post station on Doyers used to be a theater, used to be near a theater. And there were a lot of murders in there. And so the concept is that a sinkhole opens in the Postal Service Center and it reveals the body of a gangster who was murdered and buried unceremoniously. And all of these brutal murders start happening in Chinatown, and a family has to basically stop this like rampaging, vampiric, hatchet wielding gangster.
Nice.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. I'm so excited
Mhm.
for it.
I'm
Um,
hyped. I'm hyped.
yeah.
It was inspired by like the vibe of Fright Night, both
Mhm.
versions of Fright Night, the original and the remake with David Tennant. But yeah, have you not seen that?
I have. I just
Okay.
remembered that he
Yeah,
was in the movie.
he's
I
so
was
good
like,
in it.
"Wait, oh," I was like, "What? What? David Tennant's in it?" I remember seeing it, but then yeah, I remember now.
And Colin Farrell. But yeah, so that was my
Yeah.
adventure. I'm super excited because I don't know anything about the other adventures. I know Sen, you're doing one about like a food truck.
Hmm.
Yeah, Connie
I'm really
Chang's doing
hyped.
one. Ross
Oh,
Chung is
nice,
on it. Stephen Wu, who's doing some of the artwork for us, is doing something for it as well. Alex Bui, Ethan
nice.
Yen, Jasmine Bular, who we're about to chat with
Oh,
in
super cool.
yeah after this. Like she's doing something for it, and then like the usual suspects, right? Like you have Misha B, you have Janaea Kemper, Diego Old Skull. Carlos Cisco. Let's see who
Oh,
else.
you got
Mendez.
Diogo from Brazil.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Really prolific OSR writer.
Yeah.
Hmm.
James Mendez Hodes, of course.
Hmm.
Nice.
Eloy Lasanta.
I love Eloy.
And then Herb and I are writing a scenario together, and trying to flesh something out. And I think Sen, you're doing something for it too.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
food
The
truck.
food truck thing.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
food truck thing. Yeah.
So I think the point being said is that if you missed out on the first version of Jiangshi, the reprint is an awesome opportunity to get an updated version of the game alongside a whole host of really, really diverse adventures.
Hmm.
While, the game itself is really focused on the Chinese experience, the themes of like intergenerational knowledge, trauma, racism, and
Mhm.
like the diaspora are not only felt by the Chinese community.
That's right.
And you'll get that in all of these adventures, and you'll be able to kind of explore it at your table with your group and kind of have these conversations about family and food and horror.
Right.
Uh,
That was so good.
that's oh wow, that's a
Damn,
that's a
that
good
was so
clip.
good.
The
Oh my god.
The end. The end. No, but we always end the episode with where can folks find you online? Because I'm gonna link the backer kit campaign in the
Please.
show notes and on YouTube. But where can folks find you two online and learn about all of the other work that you do?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
You
Oh,
go
sorry. I
first.
should
Oh,
have
okay.
said, yeah, Banana, go first.
Oh, okay. You can find me on all the social media platforms at Banana Chan Games. You can find my publishing company, Read Write Memory, at Read Write Memory on all social media, and our website is rwmemory.com. And yeah, super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Sen?
You can probably find most of my stuff on X is probably the easiest place because you just write my name in there, Senfoonglim, and I think I'm the only person in the world with that name, so you should be able to find me. And from there, you can find everything because there's like a link tree and my
You're just
my
that prolific
card.co
of a
stuff.
designer.
Well, it's just that I have my finger in many pots,
No,
which
you're
is why I
super
don't respond
talented.
to emails.
You're super talented. I look up to both of you and your work ethic and the stuff that you put out. I am honored to even just like be credited alongside you on like
Oh, whatever,
various
man.
other projects. But that said, I know we're on a time limit. I will have all of these links in the show notes. So all of the socials, all of the websites, and of course the backer kit link to Jiangshi's reprint and all of the new haunts. I can't wait for this to come out. I'm super excited to just see this be another like huge success. And that's it. That's it. That's awesome. Thank you for joining me again for an episode of Asians Represent. First one since episode 19. I believe this is episode like 88.
Wow.
Oh,
Oh, good episode number.
what? That's
I did that on
wild.
purpose. It's
That's
on purpose.
awesome.
We did
That
it.
is awesome. Thank
So
you.
yeah, episode double happiness.
That's right.
Thank you for being here and thank you for listening.